Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second virtual workshop organized by Children and Screens, Institute of Digital Media and Child Development, about screens and COVID-19. My name is Pam Hurst-Della Pietra, President and founder of Children and Screens. The Children and Screens Institute is now the nation's leading interdisciplinary scientific research organization that assesses both the positive and negative impact of technology on children's health and well-being. During the pandemic, Children and Screens is funding research that explores how successfully screens are used in positive ways for distance learning and maintaining strong social connections. We are also funding studies to explore the negative effects of screens, including compulsive device use, potential impacts on anxiety, depression, and other health outcomes. Additionally, we are funding investigations into family dynamics at this time, specifically the quantity and quality of parent-child interactions. We strive to provide the highest quality multidisciplinary dialogue and evidence-based guidance to you and your families. If you yourself are struggling with device-related challenges or your children are having issues with it, you are not alone. We are here to help. The COVID-19 crisis is reshaping parenting and digital media habits everywhere. There are more than 100 people on this Zoom call from so many states and quite a few countries seeking answers to questions similar to those you may have. Today's workshop will focus on ways of managing school-age children's screen time, screen use during this crisis, and helping parents juggle your new job titles, including homeschool teacher and full-time caregiver. We will respond to your questions, concerns, and challenges, and provide practical tips for structuring your necessary screen time at work, in classes, and in video calls to friends and family, while continuing to enjoy meaningful in-person connections every day. I would like to extend a big thank you in advance to our extraordinary panel of experts for sharing your insights today. Our panelists have reviewed the questions you submitted and will answer as many as they can. If you have additional questions during the workshop, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many as we can. We are recording today's workshop and will upload a video to YouTube by tomorrow. We will send you the link when the video is available. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Colleen Kraft, a pediatrician at Children's Hospital Los Angeles and former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and our esteemed panelists, human developmental neuroscientist, Dr. Mariah Thomason, the Barricade Associate Professor of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at NYU Langone, Dr. Elizabeth Englander, Professor of Psychology and Director and founder of the Massachusetts Aggression Reduction Center at Bridgewater State University, and author of a book for parents that was just published yesterday, 25 Myths About Bullying and Cyberbullying. You can find it on Amazon now. And last, but certainly not the least, Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair, clinical psychologist, consultant, and author of The Big Disconnect, Protecting Childhood and Family Relationships in the Digital Age. Welcome, Colleen.
Thank you so much, Pam. And thank you to everybody in the audience who's come to learn and listen. And thank you to our panelists as well, too. I'll just start off by saying that social distancing during COVID-19 has really redefined all the rules for kids who are school age and screen. And we're all trying to figure out what those rules are right now, because school is happening via Zoom meetings. At the same time, for parents, work is happening virtually. And how do we organize all of this? At the same time, many families are struggling with layoffs and with illness in their family or loved ones far away, and anxiety about the future. This webinar is going to be an opportunity to look at within the chaos and find what things we can do moving forward with our kids. Because this time can actually set the foundation for building resilience during adversity. If you think about it, this is actually the most important skill that we can give to our children during this time. because it really dwarfs academic learning, test scores, telework. As a pediatrician, I'm advising my families right now to focus on building resilience with their children right now. Prioritize the most important thing you have to do in school and with work. And know that you're not going to attain the same level of learning or work productivity that you did before social distancing. But you have a most important opportunity now to take with your school-age children in modeling and experiencing a difficult time and surviving and learning to thrive through those relationships. Because it means new connections and new routines and new activities, and they become new memories. And some of these will actually involve innovative use of screen time. With that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair, who's a clinical psychologist and consultant and author of the Big Disconnect series. And she's going to talk with us about social connections and screens and things that you may not need to use screens for, but other ways to connect with your families. So welcome, Catherine, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks, Pamela, for organizing this. You know, the first thing that children need right now during this situation is to know that you're there for them in a reliable and predictable way. Now, it may seem like they prefer their screens to you all day long, but what they need is you and you to help them figure out how to cope with this awful, new, hard, challenging, frustrating, and sometimes fun way of living. Your kids may not be learning as much from school right now, but as Colleen said, the life lessons they are learning, when they learn how to cope and be flexible and get upset and calm down, as you help them with this, are really going to stand by them the rest of their lives. And these are skills kids need to learn regardless of whether we are having a pandemic or not. These are lifelong skills that help us be successful. That said, it's really overwhelming when we're juggling everything. How do we be there for our kids? So I'm going to give you some thoughts about how you can best be there for your kids, and also how to use tech actually as an ally with social connections and keeping your kids engaged in their lives in ways that are good and kind of mimic what they would do at school or camp. So the first thing is that it really helps if you have very predictable, consistent times in the day where your kids know you are with them screen-free. Screen-free means no iPhone, no computer, they're stashed in another room, they are not on your body or near you, because that signals to your kids they have your undivided attention. And that's something kids miss from their teachers. Their teachers beam on them when they talk to them. And our phones are so digitally distracting when we're going back and forth. We're not as present to our kids. And they're so hard to resist because they're such powerful stimulants to our brain that if we keep them stashed in another room, we're there with our kids. Meal times, keep your phones away. Walking with your children. Snack time. If you create a schedule where several times during the day, breakfast, morning snack, lunch, afternoon snack, walk time in the afternoon, cooking dinner, an evening activity. Those are 6 or 7 times scattered throughout the day that you'll do better and your kids will do better if they know you're not digitally distracted. So use your tech to help you. I do it. I set alerts, I set timers, I make my screen shut down because it's really hard to pull off of our technology. So here's where tech can help us sort of outsmart our smartphones. The next thing kids really need right now is to stay socially connected to the other people in their life that they miss. And here, tech is fabulous. It's essential because with Zoom and FaceTime, we can connect our kids to their friends. Now, of course, you want to have a family responsible use agreement that says, here's how we talk to other people and here's how we don't. And here's what the consequences are. These are about social skills and kindness. But the other thing that I've been having fun with and that are fabulous are these apps where grandparents can play with their kids like Caribou. You can play games and read to them and do word puzzles and make things. So the ways that you can use your extended family, like grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins, to help you and give you some time, beautiful. And of course, scheduling times with their friends is really important. Not all kids are good at just chatting. So using interactive apps where they can be playing games with other children really help them engage in pro-social ways. Of course, you want your kids to know what your family values are about this, so always talk about that before. Now, what we want is for kids to experience routines throughout the day as much as we can. And it's hard, but we know that when it comes to resiliency, connection, and predictable schedules really help kids. They help them stay calmer, they help them anticipate what to do. And the challenge here, when it comes to either screen time or playtime, is to really think about what kind of experiences you want your children to be having. If you plan a day ahead or plan your weeks ahead and let children make choices, they'll be much more likely to go along with the plan. Now, your job is to only give them good choices. So they're choosing between one good activity and another good activity. So the best way to think about screens right now, and it's really different from thinking, is this good or is this bad, is really thinking about the quality of the experience that either offline or online activities can give your kids. Now, not all screen time is created equal. You will hear this over and over. There's really good screen time and there's really not good screen time for their developing brains or their understanding of social relationships, etc. And you want to pick things that are good. So here are some of the things that children could actually do on screens that mimic a lot of the both educational and social activities they've been doing off screens before the pandemic. PBS Kids has great educational content for kids to learn together. There are all sorts of puzzling type games and fun science strategic things like 21 Marbles, Think Roll Space. YouTube has endless good, child appropriate, not everything on YouTube is, videos about how they can learn things like learn to play the ukulele, learn skills, learn how to cook. You can learn anything at an age appropriate way. So ask your kids, what do you want to learn today? What are you curious about? What would be fun? Podcasts are wonderful for children. There are stories that teach them how other people in other countries think, how to be a good friend. And there are good puzzle games, there are good video games. You have to find out which ones. Common Sense Media is very good. And also, children really need to exercise. They need to move. Remember, they have recess at least once, hopefully twice a day, and then again when they come home. So if you're in a situation where they can go outside, great, but not everybody is. And I'm a fan of DDR, Dance Dance Revolution, online. It's really fun. It's really hard, by the way. The kids are much better than I am. And things like yoga online, learning mindfulness online. I love Rest Hour. I think it's great. And you want to teach your kids how to have quiet time during the day. And the thing about making sure they are listening to stories when you can't read to them, learning yoga either with you or on screen, learning how to meditate, listening to Calm or Headspace, is those skills are also teaching them how to calm down, self-regulation, how to deal with frustration. Just putting a Beanie Baby on your belly and breathing slowly is a wonderful thing for little people, 5, 6, 7-year-olds to learn how to do. And they can do it when they're frustrated, upset, or just need to get quiet before bedtime. There's so many good movies and videos that are educational for children, learning about the animal kingdom. So the big question is, are you using technology in ways that support their health and well-being? You want to scatter it throughout the day. We don't want kids on screens hour after hour. We know that the not good content for children is designed to grab their attention, keep them online for as long as possible, to make money off of them being online as long as possible. And when that magic of the iPad hijacks the magic of playing in real world, that's where you hit a tipping point that's really not good for children. The last thing I'll say is, again, going back to family and connections. It's frustrating because on the one hand, we're all together now. There's an endless amount of family time, but the challenge is how to keep it as stress-free as possible. How to keep it as few meltdowns as possible. So one of the things, of course, we all know, there's no app for love. There's no video game that replaces you. So you have to take really good care of yourselves. And that means cutting yourself slack. Don't feel guilty if your kids are on screens today or tomorrow longer than you want. If you pick good stuff, you don't have to worry as much. But most of all, take care of yourselves. Get the help you need. Get the support you need from extended friends and family. Deal with your anxiety and worries about this pandemic with adults so you don't communicate that to your children. And don't forget also that in addition to being kind to ourselves as caretakers, camp counselors, educators, kids are really resilient. And they have come through pandemics before. Our four parents came through bad situations before. And we're all going to get through this together with each other and using tech as an ally.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine, and your words are really important and giving us some really good ideas. And in fact, we've gotten some great comments and questions already from some of the folks who are attending the webinar. One of them that I'll ask you about is about social media.
Mm-hmm.
Social media usage in this age group. And the comment was, I held out until the pandemic hit and then allowed my 7th grader to get an account. Is it safe, and how do I help support healthy social media use?
That is such a fabulous question, because prior to this pandemic, I think I might have answered differently. And what I would say now is social media is essential, particularly for middle schoolers. And what you want to do whenever you introduce social media at any age, whether it's a 5-year-old or your 12-year-old, is you want to talk about how we use social media and how we don't use social media. And what I'm going to do and what the consequences are going to be if I hear you being mean or posting an embarrassing picture or just participating in something that's not okay, that doesn't match our family values. What we need to understand here is that we are social creatures. And your child, your 7th grader's desire to connect to her friends is not only normal, it's healthy. So we have to use tech now to make sure that they have those social connections during the day. And there are some kids who love nothing more than starting their day, checking in with their pals at school face to face for those 10 minutes before the bells ring. If your child wants to do that in the morning before they have to go to online school, let them do it. But do it in an open space where you can hear it and you can sort of listen with that third ear we all have as parents and talk about it. You have to keep talking about what your experiences were. Were people nice? Were they mean? Was that okay? If your teacher had heard that, what might they say? And then sort of, just keep them aware that these are powerful tools that can be used for really good connecting, but we don't want to use them to be mean or hurt other people.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Catherine Steiner-Adair. We'll move on to our next panelist, Dr. Elizabeth Englander, who is the director of the Massachusetts Aggression Reduction Center at Bridgewater State University. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the problem behaviors that we can anticipate and how we can prevent them or address them. So Dr. Englander, Elizabeth.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. And welcome to the webinar, and thank you to everybody for organizing it. Some of the points I'm going to make are going to be very similar to what Catherine pointed out, and particularly the issue about talking to your kids about their social media use, which time and time again, the kids that we study in our research site is the single most important thing, is having parents who just ask and talk about these issues with them. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Because I have a few visuals to show everybody. And there we go. And I'm just gonna keep going, and we have limited time, but let's just begin by acknowledging what Catherine already pointed out, which is that everything has been upended in life, and we all know this, and it's incredibly difficult right now. We're all learning to adjust to a new normal. And it's very, very important to acknowledge that it's normal to feel anxious. It's normal for your kids to feel anxious. And the question is how to cope with these in a way that's most productive. You're not imagining that your kids are doing more screens. This was a survey done in the end of April, and you can see that screen times have gone up fairly dramatically In fact, most parents on average said their kids' screen use had doubled. And that's not, so you're not imagining it if you think your kids are doing more screen time. The good news is that a lot of the things that we know about helping kids cope with and without screens are still going to apply today, even though things have ramped up in terms of the actual time. So what counts as screen time? What counts as screen time? If you're counting up the minutes your kids are doing screens, what counts? Do educational games count? Does Zooming with Grandma count? Well, the basic point of view is that it is not a one-size-fits-all concept. Different things, there are degrees and nuances. So the least good things in terms of child development and your kids' behavior and how they're going to cope with all this is going to be things like games that have no educational merit at all. Or interacting in that way. Something that's a little bit better is things like socializing and connecting with other people. And that's actually really important in moderation because you want kids to maintain their social relationships. The best thing of all, of course, are educational games, things that are really going to help teach kids and help keep them up to pace with what's going on in school as much as possible. Although, as Catherine pointed out, we have to be really careful to give ourselves a break about this because nobody is going to be completely keeping up. That's a very tall order under these circumstances. The important thing, though, that I want to make about screen time is that even when kids are doing the best possible screens, even when they are doing very educational content, there are some things that kids learn that can't be learned on a screen. And primary among these are social skills and social coping skills. So we need kids to remember how to connect with each other. We need them to remember how to look people in the eye and have conversations. And all of that is going to need to come with their family while this is going on. That doesn't mean you have to do it 23 hours out of 24. But it is important to remember that even when content is educational, doing non-screen activities is really important. So how are you going to help yourself and help your kids cope during all of this? The first thing is you really want to focus on your mental and your physical health. And that sounds really obvious, but it's really easy to lose track of this when you're trying to do things. Basic functions, what we call vegetative functions in children, can be disrupted. You may find that your kids are having problems sleeping. You may find that they're having different eating habits, which may not be as good. Maybe they're snacking all the time. You may find that they're not getting as much exercise as they need to get. And these are very difficult things to really get completely right. But it's easy to sort of lose track of the fact that maybe your kids aren't exercising the way that they once did. I'm in the Northeast, and I know here it's been very cold and rainy until very recently. And it was really easy to sort of lose track of how much we were all exercising. So what can you do about this? Well, carve out a regular time for exercise. I think you're going to hear about scheduling today over and over again. Carve out a time. 10 a.m. is the exercise hour. 3 p.m. is the exercise hour. Or based on the weather forecast today, we're going to pick the exercise hour in the morning. And there are ways to do it. You can do it with online help. Although I'm going to argue that getting outside is the best thing for mental health and behavioral problems, but you can do it online, and there's lots of different ways to do it. Family meals are also incredibly important. One of the things that we find in our research on families is that kids who have a meal each day with their families do much better with their social relationships. They have less bullying, less cyberbullying, fewer fights with their friends. Just that time to connect with their family is really, really important. Eat at the table, not at the couch. Sit down at the table and eat slowly, don't rush. And there should be no screens during family meals while you're sitting at the table. Now that includes cell phones, so don't take calls or peek at your cell phone to see if your boss returned your email. And there's going to be an exception to this suggestion, but in general, I think it's a really good and healthy thing to do each day with your young kids. The second thing I want you to do is recognize the limitations we're all under. It may not be possible to keep your kids down to the time that you used to have them for doing their screens. So what you want to do is, again, schedule non-screen activities, exercise, outdoor. When is there a time when everyone's going to put down their screens and read a book for an hour? When is there a time when everyone or 2 or 3 people are going to get together in the kitchen and cook dinner each day? When is there a time when we're cleaning? Now, the kids aren't going to love the cleaning part. I promise you that. But it's part of life, and it's part of staying home. So there's nothing wrong with recognizing that and putting it in your schedule. Oops. You want to also try to keep your old routines going. That can be very reassuring for kids. So if you have a family game night every Sunday night, go ahead and do it again. Keep doing it, because keeping those routines going is very comforting emotionally for kids. So how do you avoid meltdown? Here I'm thinking specifically of the research we've done with families, looking at how they avoid the meltdown that comes when you're trying to yank a cell phone or a game controller out of your child's hand. And the best strategy for doing this seems to be to plan in advance for those changes. So plan by setting up the expectations, and plan by deciding how you're going to cope when there are problems. So you want to carve out non-screen times. And these are rules that are going to be times or situations where you're not going to use any screens. It could be a block of hours, 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., or it could be anytime after 9 a.m., or it could be while you're working, or it could be 1 to 2 hours before you sleep, which you should definitely do in any case, as we know devices interrupt sleep. But set up that schedule and make sure your kids know the schedule so they know in advance when things are going to change, and warn them about upcoming changes. So if all screens go off at 10 a.m. for a couple of hours, then at 9:50, say to your kids, look at the clock, you've got 10 minutes, and then all screens are going off. So you want to warn them about changes in the schedule that are coming up. Don't be afraid to kill the internet. If you think your kids aren't able to make this transition, don't be afraid to go ahead and kill the internet. And make sure the kids understand that the better they behave during the transition, the more privileges and freedom and choices they get. These two things should be linked. The privileges they get with how well they handle the transitions. Practice calming exercises with your kids before they need them. So ask your kids, what would work for you to help you calm down? Would it help to go outside? Would it help to go in your room? Would it help to open a book? Would it help to sit on my lap and have a cuddle? What would help you? And plan it in advance. Let each child decide what their calming routine is going to be, and then let them use it when they need it. When you see they're getting upset, you can say to them, you need to do your calming routine right now. And now they've known it. They know what it is. They've practiced it. And that helps a lot when they're having a hard time with transitions. You're also going to find that you're probably going to introduce new routines. So you may Zoom during dinner. Now, I realize this goes exactly against what I said about not having screens during dinner. But I think once in a while, eating dinner with your extended family where they're eating on the screen and you're eating there is kind of a nice idea. And it's just something you can do in addition to games together or doing other things like that. Talk about healthy and safe screen use. So it's perfectly okay to ask your kids questions like, did anyone try to friend you? Or did anyone ask you to send them a picture? The key thing is, don't get mad if they say, oh yeah, some weird person asked for a picture and I went ahead and sent it. Don't get upset and don't get mad. Practice being calm yourself and emphasize to your kids that you really, really want to know. Let your child know they should only share photos with family members or with really good friends who they know in person from school. I'm almost done here, and Catherine already pointed this out. You need to tend to your own mental health, and that means you need to give yourself a break. And if you need to let the kids do screens so you can take a break, that's perfectly fine. It's very important to do this, and there's nothing wrong with doing it. and you need to carve out that time. Breaks are going to help you focus when your kids need you. So don't beat yourself up for giving yourself a break. They're going to help you be more effective when you are focusing with your kids. Finally, one of the things that we always do with our kids that has been very helpful is Fred Rogers' old adage, which is to really emphasize how people are helping each other during this time. And that, you are helping and your kids are helping just by staying home. It's not all bad. This is hard. It's difficult, but everyone is pulling together and helping, and that's really important. The final thing I'll say is there are a lot of resources for parents on our website, and please, they're all free, and please feel free to download them and use them as you need to. Among these are lesson plans that you can use at home if you want to talk about some of these issues with your kids. And we're also having a free webinar on June 15th, which is designed to help everyone begin to think about going back to school. All right, that's it for me. Thank you all for listening and coming.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Great, great information. So one question from our audience is about that one child. And we all have that one child in our family where most of the kids are going to do well with the routines and do well with the time and do well with the calming. And there's that one kid that we all know is not going to do it. And they're going to take this time, and whether it's affecting them more for their anxiety, or they may have something like ADHD and difficulty with attending, but it's going to be harder for that child. What do we do to help out that child?
Well, that child may need more. They may need more of your attention, and they may need more planning in advance about how they're going to self-calm. So, and this is partly what Catherine mentioned too, that these kids, some kids are going to say, all I'm going to need to do is pick up a book and I'm fine. But you may have other kids who say, Mom, I need to go out on the deck with you and sit down with you and just try to calm my head, or I need to go into the backyard and run around in circles for 10 minutes. Some kids are going to need more and other kids are going to need less. But all kids eventually find a way to self-calm. The key is to try to get them there faster before they really work themselves up and upset themselves and upset you in the process. So I think that the most important tip from parents that we got in our research was just to plan ahead based on what your kids are like. You know what each of them is like, and plan ahead in advance about what your calming routine is going to be. And teach your kids to recognize in themselves when these feelings are rising and when they're going to need to do something to help themselves calm down.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elizabeth Englander. And then our final panelist is Dr. Mariah Thomason, who is the Bearcat Associate Professor of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Associate Professor in the Department of Population Health at NYU Langone. And Dr. Thomason is going to talk with us about neuroscience in the brain through this whole process, and also address kids with special healthcare needs or have come from underserved communities. And what is the advice that we give to them because many of us who are listening in on this webinar are parents, but we're also professionals. So Dr. Thomason, thank you.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be able to be part of a conversation like this, both because of the research that we do, but also because I'm the parent of a 10 and 12-year-olds. And just being here, I've already picked up some important ideas. And I'll talk a little bit about the neuroscience. I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in my own home, because I think we can all relate to some of what has been said. And I wanted to start by kind of addressing the final point that each of the prior speakers has made about taking care of yourself. So if I can offer anything from the lens of neuroscience, it would be that with your children, you're not going to break them. You're not going to mess them up. Their brains are very robust and plastic and strong. So the research that has looked at the effects of screens, so this is not specific to COVID, but understanding that generationally there is a major change afloat in what our children experience, have looked at brain using technologies like MRI and EEG. And I think it will be refreshing to hear that the science says that screens are not having a tremendous impact. There are measurable effects in the brain, and they primarily have to do with the way that regions are connected to one another, which is very close to the research that I do. But importantly, what we see is it's the other ancillary activities and how those activities are affected that probably are playing a bigger role in how your child's brain is developing. So screens aren't necessarily the source of evil, not like being undernourished or not getting enough sleep. It's really that they may be replacing other activities and interactions that are very important for building a healthy brain. So I think as a parent, you don't have to think about the screen as your enemy. You can think of it instead as potentially getting in the way of the kinds of positive things that you want to be introducing into children's lives that themselves can have a significant effect on brain development. Something else that we know is that because the brain is highly plastic and programmable, our environments write on the history of our lives. So even right now, by participating in this webinar, we're all slightly modifying one another's brain and potentially our behavior. So if you think about how fluid and plastic this very moment is that we're reprogramming one another, you can think about that in terms of opportunity. And I think that's what we need to do, because we're now in the midst of two different situations, the convergence of which have brought us together today: COVID and the advances of technology on this generation. In my group, we've actually launched a new initiative in response to COVID called the CoVGen Alliance. It stands for the COVID generation. All of you that are parents and caregivers are going to raise a generation of children that will have experienced something that's unprecedented. And so thinking about just the time that you've taken out to be here today to think about these topics, you're probably going to emerge with, I mean, I don't think that we should give each other too many assurances because it is a challenging time, but you will emerge having taken a more proactive role. And it turns out that that has a lot of psychological benefits in and of itself. So when we think about today about the potential impacts of the COVID experience and screens on the brain, I think that some of the things that have been addressed by the other speakers are really important to highlight because we understand the brain associations. So first of all, we know that stress imprints on the brain. Not only does stress imprint on the brain, but it imprints on the biology in such a way that that stress can be transmitted to future generations. So we carry stress and we don't necessarily give it back. So I think it's really important to think again about your own health and your child's health and how we talk about COVID and the COVID situation, how we seem to respond to the stresses that many of us are facing in terms of economic insecurity and how and when we will return to a normal schedule. As an example, none of our children have seen us say with any sort of definite fashion when things will go back to normal. We actually asked hundreds of women in the New York region, which is where I'm based, about when they thought things would go back to normal. And one of the options was never. And so that's a question that's in your mind. And it's also a question that you're not able to answer for your children. So again, we're already in this, we already have a big hug from uncertainty right now. And so the suggestions that we're hearing about planning, about scheduling, critically important. And I can say that both from the position of being a developmental neuroscientist and knowing that that is actually how infants learn. From day one, when we're brought into this earth, there are two primary things that infants use to learn to navigate. And one is they learn predictability. They actually learn stimulus response types of contingencies, and they're able to flexibly adapt and adjust. The second is social. The second is the attachment processes they learn with caregivers that allow them to form those relationships and receive the things that they need from their environment. And those are fundamentally underneath all of the things that we're talking about as adaptive strategies. So this really does kind of suggest that there's something to the biology, because the whole way that we navigate, the whole way we go from, you know, a fetus to an infant to, you know, an aging adult, and all of the spaces in between, we're going to use those powerfully. So now I'm going to turn and talk just a little bit about what's happening in my own life and in my home, because I think that this is a way to relate to the topic today. So when we knew that our children, which are, I have a son who's 10 and a daughter who's 12, when we knew that we were going to change to online school, I got a big piece of paper, like a piece of paper that's bigger than the standard letter size, right? And I drew out Monday through Friday, and I no longer was going to have, you know, the ability to do all of the tasks around the house. And so the schedule that we created started at 8:45, and it went all the way until 4 o'clock. And it's a full schedule where the kids in our situation with the ages our kids are can monitor a schedule, has activities that they have to check off throughout the day. And they actually have a different assortment of letters that they get through Monday through Friday, and it's taped on the wall in a central place. It includes things like pick up the dog poop. It's really literally that exciting of a schedule. And every morning at 8:45, we come together and we do one of 3 things as a family. It's super simple. It's before I start my day. We either do meditation, so you can get on Spotify these 5 or 6 minute meditation videos where you can just listen as a family, sit together on the carpet, or we do some sort of physical exercise or stretching, or we do dance party. And all of those things are sort of our way before 9 o'clock in the morning to christen the day together, to say, hello, we're all here, we're all starting, it's official. It's like an alarm, because everything that happens before that, which does include waking them up at 7:45 every day, so again, a schedule, is to come together. Now I'm going to tell you that is a success, right? It sounds like I knew what to do from the very beginning, but in fact, I don't know what to do from the very beginning, and I want to sort of highlight some ways that I could have even done it better. So first of all, I've noticed that when the weekend comes, it's a very different situation. The kids are looking to us and they're asking us, well, because the schedule on the wall is only Monday through Friday. And so what actually happens on the weekends, I've noticed a complete difference. What are we going to do? When is it going to happen? And so I think that that's kind of a fascinating observation about the fact that they seem a little bit lost and they want to negotiate what's going to happen for all of those minutes of the day. Another thing that happens is at night. So the schedule doesn't specify what's going to happen. And each night there's a similar conversation. Are we going to do family games? Am I going to get to go my own way is the term that they use for me. And the third is, or are we going to get family screen time? So I think an improvement to the current schedule, I think there are 2 things I want to change. Oh, and by the way, on the schedule, the kids are assigned to be the dinner helper in alternating sequence. And I think you can do this with children of all ages. And it speaks to, again, some of the things that Catherine and Elizabeth had highlighted, is that there are opportunities to learn new skills and to take on new activities. Well, many of you in your lives probably didn't make and prepare all of your meals while your children were unoccupied in the home every single night. But in the reality of during COVID, like, you've got no place to be. You are home. And so if you can afford the time, you might have a bunch of little cooks by the end of all of this. And I think that that's actually an example of that seizing new time to have bonding and attachment processes. And even if it's a toddler propped into a certain type of a chair while you're cooking in the kitchen, there's absolutely no reason that you can't be talking to that toddler and showing them some of the things that you're doing. So anyways, improvements upon what I think is already happening is, number 1, in my house, there's definitely food creep. The kids will come into the kitchen, fill a little board, do a little snacking. I think we need to have open and closed kitchen, and we need to just set what times that happens at. So I'm gonna leave this session doing things differently, and that's gonna be one of them. Another is, I don't think it would be terribly hard to put ideas on what happens each night after dinner and just have that set, so that there isn't a discussion every night about what are we going to negotiate for tonight. And then I will work on the weekends. We do have physical activity. We have some of these other things planned. So now I want to turn to kind of close with, not all things are easy for all to do. I've described a very prescribed set of circumstances. I have children that are able to act with agency and for the most part do it. I'm not saying that they're perfect. There's a little bit of no in everything that they do, but for the most part, these are children that can follow directions, and that's not true for everybody. They're also at an age when they can do that. So developmentally, some of the suggestions I'm making are not appropriate for the majority of families. A third is resources. So some people don't have a kind of a schedule that they can wrap a prescribed time around. There may be people that work internationally, they have to be on calls, they have to do, even if you're at home, you might not be somebody who has the fluidity. You also might be someone who's not at home right now, because not everybody is able to be home. There are people that have jobs that require that they're in and out of the house. And so some of what we're describing here doesn't fit. Another circumstance where it doesn't fit is families that have fewer resources. They can't necessarily put everything together in a way that the children can do this, and we can put Spotify on a central sound system that we have in our home. I mean, these are things that are not accessible to all people. And it can be hard, I think, to I'm just going to keep a schedule. I don't think that that works for everybody. And so what I would like to propose as sort of a easier set of guidelines is that you just try to monitor that your children are having the kinds of interactions that will help them to build a healthier body and to build healthier relationships. And that can come in a number of forms. It doesn't have to be this structured. And so I'm going to leave you with a tiny one, because I want to leave time for questions, which is this morning, I had a little tiny revelation. I got into bed to snuggle my son and wake him up for the day. And immediately he said, in his Minecraft game, which most of you probably have heard of Minecraft, should he build the room to do X or Y? He had like a designing Minecraft question he wanted to answer immediately upon waking. And my daughter has done similar things with her TikTok programming. And so I wanted to just suggest that there is a universe inside of your child's head, and that universe is being scaffolded by the content that they are obsessing with. And so it is an invitation for you to also care about what is happening in Minecraft and on TikTok, because I'm not interested. I have to be honest, I'm really not super excited to go there, but I have found with an intentional change that I have made in talking to my children, they want you in that universe, because that is how they are waking up. It's what they're thinking about when they go to sleep at night. And what a great invitation that is for us as parents, that even if the programming isn't brain building, it can build our relationships with them if we take an interest. And I think that's accessible to most people. So I will leave it with that, because I do really want to hear from the questions and be able to open the conversation up.
Well, thank you so much, Mariah. Appreciate your comments on here. A couple of questions that a number of participants have asked about that you might have some really great insight into is that there's some real variability in terms of what's happening with schools and programming for their kids. And there are some schools that are not doing any kind of live teaching, but are looking to families to essentially homeschool. What advice would you have for families in setting some of the curriculum and helping their children during this time? And this is particularly for families that might not have a lot of resources.
That is a really hard one. I've actually talked to several parents who have expressed giving up. And that's not a fun thing to admit or think about in terms of your children's care. But I have heard some parents say, I think we're just going to lose this time. So there's a real feeling of fatigue and powerlessness, I think, that parents are experiencing in the way that we typically are able to rely on school systems. And that comes at a number of levels. I think that there's not going to be a single answer that's going to work for everybody on this one. Maybe it's cut yourself a little bit of slack. Maybe it's trust a little bit in what you don't know. And then maybe it's try to take more of an active role in your children's life. I mean, get on Google, find out what your school subscribes to. So whether your school is offering the optimal developmental programming or not, Your school probably has some subscriptions to services that your child may or may not be sharing with you overtly. So you could ask your child exactly what those are, log in yourself and find out what those actual tools can do. And then you can fold that into the schedule. So you can, the school might give you 30% of what you want or 70% of what you want. And then maybe you can have access to this additional piece and you can just add it to the schedule. We're going to spend half an hour on this reading site where I know you can check out books, and we're going to do that every day for half an hour. And you're going to write, my kids are going to struggle with that one. You're going to write something about what you did as sort of a journal, and you're going to journal it each day. So maybe that would be accessible even if you're not sure about the teaching.
And there is also, just to add, kids are really different at different ages. Younger children have a much harder time learning in an actually active online environment. Older kids do better with online teaching, but 15% of families in the United States have no broadband access.
Right.
And so we can't rely on there only being online classes as a way to teach, but there are other resources you can ask your school for. So for example, you may be able to ask your school or your child's teacher to just give you some resources. They can mail them to you and other things like that, and find a time to sit down at the table and do some. Again, I really think this is about moderating your expectations. This is not the time for us to beat ourselves up and decide that we're supposed to shoot for the moon. Reading is always good. It's accessible to everybody. If you can get online, many families can. There's a lot of wonderful resources, but you're not necessarily going to find that your kids are going to log into their class at 9 a.m. and stay there till 2 p.m. I think for most families, that's not what's happening. And schools know this too, and they are beginning to prepare for the reality that kids are going to come back at really different points. And so, we're kind of all going to have to pull together on this and give ourselves a break, I think, and use the resources as best you can. Don't worry about always being online with them.
I'd add to that and say a lot of the stuff we do at home is educational. Cooking,
absolutely.
You have to measure it out. You have to count. What's the difference between a quarter of a teaspoon and a whole teaspoon? And the alchemy of cooking teaches science. Why is it taking so long for that water to boil? Let's look it up. And even like playing dress up. Playing dress up in real life with your clothes, your shoes, your discards is so much better than playing dress up on an iPad. Because when a child's playing dress up in real life, think of what they're doing. They are creating a story in their head. They're putting words together. They're discovering they have a luscious little imagination that doesn't have the same stereotypes and maybe racist stuff and gender straitjacket that iPad games often have. And if they're playing with a friend, they're learning how to cooperate and they're doing project-based learning together, if you will. So I think we have to remember, we all, when we were growing up, when there was no technology, just building a fort with your pillows, which is in some ways much more frustrating than Minecraft because they fall and it's so annoying. But that's how you learn to keep going. And that's how we get persistence and resilience. And you learn to deal with frustration. These are learning skills and this is learning stuff. So even if you don't have access to the internet, just involve them in what you're doing. Science, math, talking, literacy, these are the skills. We can do it.
Those are great answers to questions. And actually, you answered one of the participants' questions, which is how do we make things just as interesting or more interesting than Minecraft or TikTok or other things that we're doing? And you really answered that very nicely. Let me ask the panelists, what are your worst fears with respect to COVID-19 in the next 2 years of digital media exposure? What do you worry about the most with the developing brains of our middle childhood age kids? Catherine, I'll start with you since you're on the screen right now.
Okay. One of the things I've worried about before COVID that I worry about more now is middle age for many kids is when they develop the capacity for solitude. and reflection, and much more awareness of their own internal creativity, the things in life that are curious to them. I think it's when they start to think more about what I want to be when I grow up, meaning what I'd like to do. And on the one hand, this is a time where kids have a lot more time to pursue the things they want to do. And where I worry about the intersection between cultivating that and technology is that a lot of technology, a lot of the apps, many of the games are designed actually to steal that time away from your child's development, where kids are spending hours and hours and hours just surfing through YouTube or gaming in a posse that's not nice or kind, or just kind of numbing out in the way we all know we can do too, you know, reading your email and scrolling on whatever site comes up next. So I think protecting kids' brains on the one hand, and protecting their capacity for intrinsic and inside motivation, creativity, and curiosity on the other. I think they'll find ways to stay socially connected. I think we've got Zoom.
I think it's the social connections that worry me the most.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I worry that people will, if this is prolonged or continues in waves, I'm concerned that children are going to really begin to feel socially disconnected, really feel lonely. On the other hand, I really think people are resilient. You know, when you think about the kinds of stressors and crises that we've dealt with in the past, I have one of my kids is a college freshman, and boy, he is really grumpy about missing part of his freshman year. He was really cranky about that. But when my father was his age, he was off to Europe in World War II. That was much worse. So, you know, I worry on the one hand about a prolonged crisis and what we'll do, but on the other hand, I really am basically a very optimistic person, and I see this as a challenge, but I think that as families, we will cope with it. You know, we'll lose some things and we'll gain other things. That's the truth. You know, maybe we'll all become more connected in other ways that we thought of. Maybe we'll learn to appreciate each other more. That would be nice.
Okay, Mariah?
Well, I was gonna give you a chance to go back to other questions, but I guess I would just add developmental transitions, because there are necessary transitions, and it a little bit bridges, I think, the way Catherine and Elizabeth are thinking about it, because yes, they will find other social activities that will be very stimulating, but there are a lot of awkward and transitional stages of life. And so if this were a prolonged situation, we would be looking at a different type of developmental process. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Catherine, a question for you. I have a 9-year-old daughter at home. I'm at home with her all day. My husband is an essential health worker, and so he's gone. She's having a hard time seeing her friends, and I'm really her only playmate. What can I do to help her out?
Oh, you know, that's such a hard one. Channel your inner 9-year-old girl. You know, I think kids love it when we're curious about what matters to them, and just really try and figure out what she's interested in, and try not to edit her or make her be more grown up, more intellectual, more this, more that than she is. One of the things that kids do for each other in ways that we don't is good friends sort of tell you you're wonderful, you know, and they don't disagree with you a lot. Sometimes they should disagree with you more. So I think one of the things 9-year-old girls really love is they love to play, and they love to play collaboratively, and they love to co-create. So whatever it is that she likes to do, you know, this question sort of reminds me and goes back to something that Mariah said, you know, about not loving Minecraft. I remember playing G.I. Joe way back when, not loving it, but knowing that the way to make my son feel like I really was into was to get into what he was into.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's what I'd say. And I guess I'd also try and see if there are ways at all you can join her up with any other kind of good social thing online.
Well, thank you. Elizabeth, I have a question for you from a parent. My 12-year-old is getting increasingly restless and he really wants to get an Xbox or a PlayStation. I'm not so sure. What would your answer be?
Well, the first thing to remember is that an Xbox or a PlayStation is not just a gaming tool anymore. Kids can use them for all kinds of activities. They're not just used for games. So I would say that the first step would be to educate yourself about everything that whatever your child is thinking about, is interested in, and then think about rules or ways that you might want to set down limits on how they were going to use it. If you're really uncomfortable with game playing or the other ways that these machines can be used, I would say don't get it, but I understand why kids want them. Right now, especially kids in this age group are craving connectivity with their peers. They're absolutely craving it. And this is one way they can achieve that. So as long as you make sure that things are done within the limits of what you're comfortable with, then I would consider getting it for him. But I would definitely say that you're not going to know yet if you're comfortable with this until you take some time to really educate yourself about all the different ways a gaming system can be used, and make sure that you're comfortable with your son really playing by the rules. And you do need to make it clear to him that his privileges, if you decide to get this, his privileges in having it are going to be directly linked to his responsible use of it. And that means that whatever rules or limitations you all decide on, he's going to need to abide by those. And that's why he gets that privilege.
Okay, that's great answer to that. I have a question for Mariah. Can you speak to the impact of increasing screen use on the developing brain for kids with autism spectrum disorder? I'm really concerned about my son regressing during this time.
Yes, so I don't think that I know of any specialized advice that I could give for a child with autism. And as we all appreciate, every child is unique. So even within a particular developmental domain, it could be that there are certain concerns that who is asking this question, this parent has about their own child. So I wouldn't think that there would be a particular suggestion that would fit for all. If there are domains where your child and you have an intuition about your child having specific needs for focus, whether it's language or social, I would probably trust those intuitions as a parent, despite what anybody else might tell you about don't worry, because I think there's a tendency to want to comfort one another and say, don't worry, it's okay. I would trust your concerns, and I would probably try to just make sure that you give them additional attention in whatever domain that is that's of interest or concern. I would also say that there's a lot behind the processing that the brain does that we don't take time to appreciate. So one thing that we've learned in neuroscience is about a system that's called the default mode network. The default mode network is a system comprised of areas that are very active when we're in a mind-wandering state. Now, when you're locked into a screen or a technology or even a conversation with another person, this particular default mode system is not active. This is a system that's active when your mind wanders off the page of a book that you're reading. It's comprised of the medial prefrontal cortex, medial temporal regions, lateral parietal regions, that are connected, and an area that's called the posterior cingulate. And we do see differences in the default mode network in children with autism, but we also see differences with almost every single neurological disorder. So I don't think that it's a very special to autism, but it is special to the human brain. So the fact that it's affected in so many diseases and that connectivity within the system is so important for cognitive health. I really think that it's relevant as we consider what screens are doing, because there is some amount of activity that our brain is disposed to doing that isn't the kind that we necessarily give attention to. And so I wish I could go on and on about the default mode network. I actually think it's a fascinating system that we all have that has some serious meaning that we don't fully understand yet. So the short answer for a parent is trust your intuition, focus on those areas. The second thing is that there are things that the brain is doing to build a better, stronger brain that you're not always able to understand or think about. And not being on screen and being creative, like Catherine was talking about, building and the kinds of play that we can do, that enhancing those kind of creative activities, I think would be helping some of the systems that are not going to be as active when the programming is coming toward us. So maybe thinking a lot about those.
Thank you. Got a question for Catherine. And this is about connections, but maybe some questionable connections. My 12-year-old's best friends all play first-person shooter games. It seems like these guys only want to do that, and he feels excluded because I will not let him do that. What would your advice be to me?
Oh boy, this is so hard. I've been there. All I can say is really been there. I think, I think if we start thinking high, what makes kids feel resilient? What makes them feel secure? The research comes around to what we call a nurturing and authoritative position or approach. And it means that you are loving, but you also say, look, these are our family values and this is what we think. And here's why I don't want you doing it, or here's why I'm going to let you do it, even though I don't like it, because these are the things I don't like about it. But I think right now being connected to your friends is so important that I'm going to sit down, watch some of this with you intermittently, and I'm going to ask you to tell me everything that you saw that was violent, racist, sexist. So as long as I know you're connecting, but you're also deconstructing those values that are so bad, then I might let you do it. That's one approach. The other approach is to say no, because we know that there's some fallout from those games when they get in your head over and over and over that I don't want in your brain. I don't want in your heart. I don't want you thinking about people or women or violence in that way. And let's find other ways for you to connect to your friends. So, and I think you have to understand your child too, because if you have a kid who tilts towards aggression, I'd say be careful. No, if you've got a kid who's sort of calm and kind and loves to read and loves to do all sorts of other things, they're less likely to have the negative impacts that can come from playing games like that. We know there are some, and it really impacts kids differently. Maybe Elizabeth, I think this is an area you've done a lot of research and you'd add to what I have to say.
Yeah, actually, Catherine, that's a great point. And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that kids process that kind of aggression really differently. So the key thing is to know your child and to understand where their vulnerabilities are. Not all kids want to play this, and not all kids want to play it forever. And sometimes it's really grasping onto something that's fascinating because your parents hate it and it's getting over it. Other times it's not like that. So I think part of what you have to do is think about what your child's like, think about exactly what they're going to be doing and educate yourself. And then if you decide to allow it, watch your child and see what kind of reaction or response or changes or no changes that you see. As with any screen activity, it will have an impact. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, it is also a way that some kids really connect, especially boys, but more and more we see these with girls as well. Mm-hmm. And, we would be foolhardy to ignore any connections right now. But you do need to take care. You're playing a little bit with fire with these, and I think you need to think about your child and think about what they're doing and then watch the situation. Just what Catherine said.
So I've got a little social commentary on here. Somebody just mentioned that their 9-year-old just heard us talk about this and said, see, you can let me do this and just watch over me. And just for the audience, this is not what I heard. What I heard was, I will sit with you You know, most of the time you're not going to let your mom go and play games with you and your friends, but I'm going to sit with you and we're going to talk about what you're seeing and what you're doing and what you're experiencing and what are some of those themes that come out here, and we're going to discuss that. So other 9-year-olds in the audience, this is what we're talking about. This is not, no, you can just play this and we're just going to sit by and watch you do it. This is going to become a learning experience and talking about violence and aggression and what do we see and what's appropriate and what isn't. And it's a very, very different.
If I could just make one point on what you're saying too, Colleen, what I would certainly not say is that you should be spending your entire day watching your child screen over their shoulder.
Right.
Firstly, even if somebody suggests this, you're not going to do it. It's not feasible. It's not possible. But what you can do is, particularly when new things are being introduced, you can watch what's going on and see how it's going. You can certainly have ongoing conversations with your kids about what they're doing and how they're experiencing it. You know, so it's not just, like Colleen said, it's not just parking you in front of it and letting you do whatever you want. But at the same time, it's recognizing that we're in different circumstances today, and we want you to be able to connect with your friends. We want you to have fun. Your parents are not out there to make sure you have no fun. That's not what they're doing. That's not what anyone's doing. And so just being careful about it and making sure that what you're doing is both safe and healthy. Screen use has to be healthy, not just safe. It also has to be healthy. And that's part of what parents need to do.
Well, while we're on that topic, oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something, Catherine?
Well, before airports shut down, every week I'd sort of be somewhere teaching kids about their brains on tech, as well as talking to parents and educators. And I think one thing for 9-year-olds and their caregivers to think about, and this is true for children of all ages, is let's do a little experiment and see sort of like how calm and how you're treating your siblings and how we're talking to each other before you get on that game. And then let's look at how you are after. And that's can really be important, because you could have 4 kids, they're wired differently. Some can transition on and off any screen really smoothly. We don't get 4 of those usually in one batch, unfortunately. And it's really important to actually use these experiences also to explain to your children why you get so revved up. We're only going to do that on the weekend, because, you know, and let's work on a goal of you learning how to calm down and transition on and off. And isn't it interesting? You really pick on your little brother or sister more after you played a video game than before. What do you think about that? So these are all at home teachable moments to really, 1, pay attention to your kids, but 2, also really teach them about how we as a species interact with these technologies, each of us in our own ways.
Catherine,
And your family values too.
Absolutely right.
Your
And
family
Catherine,
values. So if what you're doing is saying to your kids, I'm going to let you play an aggressive video game, but back here where we're treating each other as real people, I expect you to treat your siblings and your parents well, then that draws a big line, a big demarcation between a game and real life. And some kids have no problem with that demarcation, but other kids, it's very confusing, and they're going to need it really spelled out for them. That, you know, just because you beat somebody up on a game doesn't mean that you can bop your little sister, that kind of thing.
Mariah, did you have any thoughts about this?
No, I was just going to trumpet what Catherine had added about activities before and after. So behavior change that you'll observe before and after certain types of engagement. And it's absolutely true. And that individual variation piece is absolutely true. And there is a whole science that has even demonstrated that if you look at individuals, when you, for example, give them testosterone and then scan their brain, you can actually see that they process emotional faces differently in the brain just based on the fact that you've changed chemical levels in the body. And so you can imagine your child interacting with very stimulating. I mean, look at the feedback that they get from these programs. and then coming out of that, and how there's no way that they went in biologically exactly the same they came out, but still also, as both Catherine and Elizabeth highlighted, kids are going to differ. So I have talked to my son about these games. He's very into it. So I have that in our lives. And he is also very, it's very easy for him to communicate how he's processing the information. So he's articulate about it. So I've been able to learn from him just in the way that you would if you sat down and talked to your child about what it is that they're seeing and experiencing. And again, not every child can articulate it, so it's going to be hard sometimes.
Well, a related topic that I'm going to start with Elizabeth on addressing, but I've gotten a lot of questions about, is cyberbullying. And how do you know your kids are involved in it, either as the bullier or the victim? How do you begin to address this? And how do you maybe make this part of that greater learning with before and after activities type things? So.
Well, there's lots of ways to address cyberbullying, and there have been reports in some of the studies that have been done since this pandemic began that there is an increase. There certainly have been more anecdotal stories. You know, when kids have a lot of screen time and less structure, you tend to see these kinds of social problems. So it's not terribly surprising. The key to dealing with it, I think, is to really keep the conversation going. So let your kids know that you're aware of things. Tell them about a case that you've heard about or a problem between two kids, and ask them what they've seen or what they've experienced with their peers. There's no way that you're going to turn digital life into or any kind of life into a place where everyone is puppies and rainbows all the time. It's not going to happen. The key is, how do you cope with it? So how do you know how to use behaviors that are going to do things like reduce the amount of cruelty that's going on, or reduce everyone's level so that they're a little bit calmer when they're interacting on social media and less likely to jump on something or to gang up on a person? And there's lots of ways to do that. One is just to talk about these issues, like I've said. You can also do lesson plans. So like I said, we posted on our website lesson plans parents can use. And these are really thought-provoking. And the idea is to get kids to really think about their relationships with their peers. And if you say something carelessly or thoughtlessly, how is it going to impact it when you do go back to socializing in person and you see this person again? So, you know, cyberbullying is not like, it's not like a skill like knowing what button to push. It's not that kind of thing. It's a social skill. It's about understanding how to interact with peers in a way that's really positive and fun, and that doesn't erode the trust between people and erode the positive feeling you have with your friends and what you want. The single biggest thing that kids told us that helped them deal with cyberbullying, well, there were two really big things. One is to have friends who really stuck with them and supported them. And the second thing was to have parents who just asked what was going on. Parents who said, you know, I've heard that on TikTok, sometimes kids leave mean things in the comments. Has that ever happened to you? I mean, how do you handle it? How does it make you feel? And how could your friends help you with that? You know, those kinds of conversations where you're not sort of saying, you know, I'm going to cut off your technology at the first mean word, but instead you're saying, how are we going to cope with this in a way that's going to help you in the long term? I think that's a better strategy than sort of looking to yank the technology the first time your child comes up to you with a problem, because if you do that, they are not going to tell you about problems. And that's something that none of us want to go to.
Can I add to that?
Please.
Let me echo what you're saying and just throw out 3 words that I heard over and over and over from the thousands of kids I interviewed, middle schoolers on up. You know, our kids are going to get in trouble online, and it worries us, but don't get too worried. The challenge is we want to be the person they go to when they get in trouble online. We don't want them going online for advice about how to handle a situation, right? So I said, one of the questions I asked my researcher, what are the things your parents do that make you not want to tell them when you participate in cyberbullying, when you get Zoom bombed, whatever, the bad thing is. And the three adjectives where I would never tell my parents, they're too scary, they're too crazy, or they're too clueless. So scary parents do just what Elizabeth said. What? You did that? No computers for the rest of the pandemic. We're off
Or
screen.
they flip out. A lot of kids in our research.
But the crazy parents flip out. What? You watch the violent game, you're going to be a school, shooter tomorrow. No. Or they say, oh my God, that girl was so mean to you. I'm going to call her mother and tell her mother how awful you were, right? Crazy parents make it worse by overreacting. And clueless parents don't do what all of us have been talking about, which is they don't sit down and watch the game with you, play the game with you, have a family responsible use or family values conversation before, where you discuss, here's how we're going to do this. So what you want to be, not scary, crazy, or clueless, you want to be approachable and you want to stay calm, like Elizabeth was saying. And the other thing is you have to be informed. And if you can do that, then you'll be the go-to parent your kids need you to be to develop the resilience that we've been talking about during this time in their lives and this time in history, where technology is playing a much bigger role in the world that they are growing up in.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask each of the panelists for one final thought moving forward as we get to the close of this, and then I'm going to turn this back over to Pam Della Pietra to close the session. So Mariah, your one last thought to leave this group with.
Oh boy. Okay. How about that? At one point it was said here that children crave social interactions. And I want to offer an adaptation of that idea, which is not all children know that they crave social interactions. So you might not have a child that is coming to you and asking to do things. And so I just might suggest that you create them, and your child probably won't hate them. And they probably will serve a need that you may be more aware of than your child is. So that'll be my final suggestion, is just your child is craving. But if any of you out there thought, no, not my child, then the response is maybe that child is and just needs a little bit of a creative structure to create that for your child.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Well, I think as a final thought, I would think about how to cope with anxiety, which is absolutely rampant in children. It was rampant before this began. I have a house full of anxious children, and I'm very well aware of this issue. I think we're all anxious right now, but you can help so much in coping with anxiety by focusing on the positive. So you're not alone. Your kids are not alone. They have you. They have their families. They have friends. They have, their grandma and grandpa on the Zoom, and they are not alone. They don't have to go through it alone. And it's really a good time to emphasize how much we can help each other and how much their families are there for them. And I think ultimately that's what's really going to help kids develop resilience, is having the experience where you went through something anxiety provoking, but you did okay with it. You came out the other end and you succeeded. And that's going to build a lot of resilience in these kids. So I think that's a good point to leave it at.
Great. And Catherine.
Well, once again, you're going to hear a lot of echoes here. The first thing I wrote down, the question, was one of my favorite axioms in life, which is don't worry alone. Because when we worry alone, we spin out in our own anxiety and it gets worse and we tend to isolate. So, and the other one that I wrote down was hope. So I think that what we need to do as much as possible is be a voice of reassurance and a resource to our children and to each other. We always want to try and create optimism in kids. We used to think you were born an optimist or a pessimist. Now we know we can really shape what's called the growth mindset. And right now, I think, we're in this together. You're not alone. We're going to get through this. And singing songs of hope It's a wonderful thing to do with family, with friends, with whoever, but just keep that music not only alive in your head through Spotify or Pandora, but really with each other.
Great. And I will just give one final thought too, in that if we look at chaos and opportunity as the same thing, you've heard lots of great ideas and lots of great thoughts throughout this last hour and a half. Pick one thing, make that your opportunity to connect with your child, to maybe use a screen or maybe not use a screen and do something outside or physical or cook with your child, but take one thing to move forward and celebrate the relationship you have with your children and that you have opportunities to move forward as a family. And with that, I'm going to thank our panelists and then move on to Pamela Delahurst-Pietra to close out the session. And thank the participants as well. You had some great questions.
Thank you for coming and for all your great questions. Thank you, Colleen, Mariah, Catherine, and Elizabeth. You were truly outstanding and we really learned a lot. Please sign up for our next Children's Screens workshop in this series and share information about them with your friends, family members, and your network. Teens and Screens during COVID-19 will take place on Tuesday, May 12th, again at 12 p.m. Please sign up and submit your questions. We'll try to answer as many as we can. Tomorrow, you will receive a link to a video of today's workshop. Please share the video with your fellow parents, teachers, researchers, and friends. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. When you leave the workshop, you'll see a link to a short survey. Please click on the link and let us know what you thought of our workshop. Thanks again, and everyone be well.